Welcome to Jewel Town. I'm a horror writer. I've spent years building worlds where the dark things are real, where the past refuses to stay buried, and where the line between the living and the dead is thinner than anyone is comfortable admitting. But long before any of those stories became books, they started as questions, as research, as late nights falling down one rabbit hole after another, finding things I couldn't stop thinking about, things too interesting to keep to myself. That's what Jewel Town is. It's the space where my research lives. The books are one part of it. This podcast is another. And Ghostlore, the series you're about to listen to, is where I take the folklore, the history, and the cultural theory that sits underneath the horror genre and bring it out into the open. Because here's what I've learned writing horror. The scariest things aren't invented. They're found. And the more you dig into why human beings have always believed what they believe about the dead, the more you realize that no one had to make any of this up. It was already there. Waiting. This is Jewel Town. There's a moment, and I think most of you listening know exactly the moment I mean, when a place feels wrong. Maybe it's an old house. Maybe it's a stretch of road at 2 a.m. Maybe it's a room you've walked into 100 times that suddenly, inexplicably, feels occupied in a way it wasn't before. Your rational mind scrambles for an explanation. A draft. A trick of light. Fatigue. But something older than your rational mind, something much, much older, has already reached a different conclusion. Something is here. This episode is about Ghostlore. This is podcast about the stories we tell about the dead, why we tell them, and what those stories reveal about the living. Today, in this first substantial episode, we're going back to the very root of it. Not to any single haunting, not to any specific ghost. We're going back to the question that sits underneath all of it. Why do humans believe in ghosts at all? Not just some humans. Not just one culture, one religion, one era, all of us. Across every continent, every century, every civilization that has ever left a record of itself, the ghost is there. Waiting. That's not a coincidence. That's not superstition. That is one of the most profound and persistent facts about what it means to be human. And to understand it, we need to talk about folklore part 1. What is folklore, really? When most people hear the word folklore, they picture something quaint. The fairy tale. Old wives' tale. Stories told by firelight in a world before electricity, before science, before we knew better. That picture is wrong. And it's wrong in a way that matters enormously to anyone who wants to understand why ghost stories exist. Folklore isn't the primitive ancestor of knowledge. It is knowledge, a different kind of knowledge, transmitted differently, serving a different but equally vital function in human life. Here's the academic definition, and bear with me because it's actually fascinating. Folklore is the body of expressive culture shared by a particular group of people. It includes oral traditions, tales, legends, proverbs, jokes. It includes material culture, the objects a community makes and uses. And it includes customary lore, the rituals, celebrations, beliefs, and behaviors that define a group's identity. Crucially, folklore is not something you learn in a classroom. It passes between people. Informally, a story told at a kitchen table, a warning passed from parent to child, a tale shared between friends who grew up in the same town and know the same haunted house on the same hill. And here's the part that changes everything. Folklore is not old. Folklore is not dying out. Folklore is alive. It is being created right now today in every social group on Earth. That friend who swears the apartment building downtown is haunted. That's folklore in motion. The subreddit full of people sharing their experiences with shadow figures and things seen at the edge of sleep. Folklore. The coworker who knows the story of what happened to that family in the house at the end of the road. A story that shifts slightly every time it's told, picking up new details, new dread. Folklore. Folklore is not a relic. It's a living system. And ghost beliefs, ghostlore, to use the academic term, are among its oldest and most enduring expressions. Part. The ghost in the record. Let's go back. As far back as the record takes us, in ancient Mesopotamia, the civilization that gave us the first written literature, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, there are texts describing the Edemu, the spirit of a dead person that could return to trouble the living. These spirits were not metaphors. They were a documented part of daily life, something to be managed through ritual, appeased through offering, guarded against through prayer. In ancient Egypt, the dead were so present in the lives of the living that entire architectural systems, The pyramid, the tomb, the canopic jar were designed around managing the relationship between the two worlds. The ka and the ba, the spirit components of a person, could linger, could return, could interfere. Ancient China had its hungry ghosts, spirits of the dead who had not been properly mourned or buried, who wandered the earth in a state of perpetual need. An entire festival, still observed today, exists specifically to feed and appease them. Ancient Greece gave us the shade, the hollow echo of a person that descended to the underworld, but could, under certain conditions, cross back. Homer's Odyssey features one of the earliest ghost encounters in Western literature, when Odysseus travels to the land of the dead and speaks with the shades of the fallen. Rome had the Lemures, malevolent spirits of the dead, particularly those who had died violently or without proper burial. They were considered so dangerous that an entire Roman festival, the Lemuria, was dedicated to their expulsion from the household. Norse had Draugar, the undead who rose from their burial mounds with terrible strength and hunger. Medieval Japan had Yurei, female spirits, often wronged in life, who returned draped in white with black hair loose across their faces. A description so iconic it's still being used in horror films today. Indigenous cultures across North America, South America, Africa, Australia, every tradition has its own version of the returning dead. Different in detail, identical in essence, the dead come back. Now, ask yourself, what are the odds that all of these cultures, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, all independently invented the same false belief? The answer that folklore studies offers is both simpler and more profound. They didn't invent it. They discovered it. They discovered a truth about human psychology so deep and so consistent that no culture, once it encountered death, could avoid the same conclusion. Something persists. Something returns. Something lingers. Part 3. Why we need ghosts. Here's the question that folklore scholars have spent decades wrestling with. Why do ghost beliefs persist? Because that's the thing about folklore. It's not arbitrary, it's not random. Folklore artifacts and ghost stories are folklore artifacts, only survive if they continue to do something useful for the community that carries them. A story that serves no purpose dies. It doesn't get told again. It doesn't get passed down. It disappears. Ghost stories have not disappeared. They have been told continuously, without interruption, for as long as human beings have had language. Which means they are doing something essential. What? 4 things, as it turns out, and a scholar named William Bascom mapped these out in his analysis of folklore's functions, which applies with striking precision to ghost beliefs specifically. First, ghosts let us safely explore what terrifies us most. Death is the one experience every human being will have and none of us can fully prepare for. It is the ultimate unknown. Ghost stories create a controlled space, a story, a performance, a shared fiction, in which we can approach that terror without being consumed by it. We can ask, through the story, what happens after? Is there something on the other side? Are the people I've lost still somewhere? The ghost story doesn't answer those questions definitively, but it holds them open in a way that pure rational thought cannot. It lets us live with the mystery rather than being paralyzed by it. Second, ghost beliefs validate and reinforce cultural values. Pay close attention to which ghosts appear in any given culture's tradition, and you'll learn everything about what that culture considers most important. Cultures that prize proper burial rites produce ghosts who return because burial rites were neglected. Cultures that value family loyalty produce ancestral spirits who watch over, or punish, their descendants. Cultures with strong codes of justice produce ghosts of the wrongfully killed, restless until vengeance is served. The ghost is always a mirror. It reflects the living community's deepest values back at itself. The haunting is a moral argument. Third, ghost stories teach this is the one people least expect. But think about it. What does a ghost story actually do in the telling? It warns. Stay away from that place. Don't break that promise. Don't wrong that person. Don't disturb the dead. Don't go into the woods after dark. Ghost stories are among humanity's oldest pedagogical tools, ways of encoding the community's accumulated wisdom about danger, ethics, and consequence into a form so compelling, so emotionally resonant, that it bypasses the conscious mind and lodges directly in the gut. You don't decide to remember a ghost story. You just do. Fourth, ghost beliefs exercise social control. This is the darkest function, and the most fascinating. Ghost stories have always been used, deliberately or not, to police behavior. The haunted place you shouldn't visit, the hour you shouldn't be out, the thing you shouldn't do, the wrong you shouldn't commit. In many cultures, the ghost of a wronged person is the ultimate threat, not just to the specific wrongdoer, but to anyone who might be tempted to commit the same wrong. The ghost story makes moral consequences vivid in a way that abstract rules cannot. This is why certain kinds of ghosts appear with striking regularity across completely unconnected cultures. The wronged woman, the unavenged murder victim, the child who died before their time. These are not coincidences. They're the moral pressure points of human community, given form and voice part for. How ghost stories travel. One of the most remarkable things about ghostlore is how it moves. Folklore scholars discovered something extraordinary when they began cataloging folk stories across different regions and cultures in the 19th century. The same stories kept appearing, in different languages, in different centuries, separated by oceans and mountain ranges. The same structure, the same moral, the same ghost. This gave rise to one of the central questions of folklore studies. Does a story travel from one place to another, or do different cultures independently arrive at the same story because they're all responding to the same deep human truth? The answer, it turns out, is both. Some ghost stories travel. They move along trade routes, migration paths, coastlines. They get carried by sailors, merchants, soldiers, slaves. They arrive in a new place and take root, picking up local color, local landscape, local names. The story of the spectral woman in white, sometimes called La Llorona in Latin American tradition, sometimes the White Lady in European tradition, sometimes the Yurei in Japanese tradition, appears across the world in so many variations that scholars have argued both for common origin and for independent invention. Possibly both are true. Other ghost archetypes appear to arise independently because the conditions that produce them are universal. Every culture has deaths it considers unresolved: the murdered, the drowned, the abandoned, the betrayed. Every culture must find a way to process those deaths. The ghost is the solution every culture reaches for, because the ghost gives form to what is otherwise formless. Grief, guilt, the impossible wish that the dead could speak. And here is what I find most extraordinary about this. The ghost story is one of the most perfect transmission mechanisms ever devised. Folklore scholars have noted that ghost stories, and folk narratives in general, exist in constant variation. No two tellings are identical. Each storyteller adds something, removes something, adjusts the details to the audience, the moment, the place. And yet, beneath all that variation, the essential core of the story remains recognizable. The structure holds. This is not a bug. This is the feature. The variation is what keeps the story alive and relevant. The stable core is what makes it transmissible, what allows it to pass from one person to another, one generation to another, one culture to another, and still be recognized as the same story. The ghost story is, in this sense, almost indestructible. Part 5. The ghost in the modern world. You might think that ghost beliefs would fade in the modern world, that science, rationalism, and electric light would drive the ghost out of serious human concern and into the realm of entertainment. You would be wrong. Ghost beliefs are not retreating, they're transforming. And in their transformation, they're demonstrating exactly what folklore scholars have always argued. This is a living system, not a dying one. Consider the ghost hunting phenomenon: hundreds of television shows, thousands of amateur investigators, millions of people engaging seriously with the question of whether the dead persist and return. This is not fringe behavior. This is mainstream cultural engagement with one of humanity's oldest questions, carried out with 21st century tools. Consider the explosion of ghost story sharing online: forums, subreddits, YouTube channels, podcasts exactly like this one, where people share personal experiences of the uncanny with strangers across the world. This is verbal folklore in a new medium, doing exactly what it has always done, transmitting the community's understanding of death, the unknown, and what might lie beyond, from one person to another. Consider horror as a genre, the most commercially resilient genre in fiction and film, decade after decade, regardless of what else is happening in culture. The ghost story is at its heart, whether the ghost is literal or metaphorical. We keep returning to it because it keeps doing something we need it to do. The ghost has not been explained away. The ghost has logged on. And in moving into digital space, ghost stories are doing something genuinely new while remaining essentially the same. A Reddit thread full of people sharing their experiences with sleep paralysis, and the dark figure in the corner of the room is, structurally, the same as a group of villagers sharing stories about the spirit that walks the crossroads at midnight. The medium is different. The transmission is different. The function is identical. We are still telling each other that something persists. That death is not the end of the story. That the dead, under certain conditions, find their way back to the living. What the dead tell the want to leave you with something to sit with. Ghost stories are not about ghosts. They never have been. The ghost is the vehicle. What the ghost story is about, what it has always been about, across every culture and every century, is the living. The ghost story is how a community asks its hardest questions. What do we owe the dead? What happens to the people who are wronged and never see justice? What does it mean to be forgotten? What survives us? These are not questions science has answered, or will answer. They are questions that live in the space between what we know and what we fear, and they require a different kind of language. The language of story, of image, of the thing glimpsed at the edge of the dark. Folklore gives us that language. It has always given us that language. And the ghost, in all its forms across all its cultures and all its centuries, is one of the most eloquent things that language has ever produced. So the next time you feel that wrongness in a room, the next time the hairs rise on the back of your neck, and something older than reason tells you that you are not alone, know that you are part of an unbroken line of human beings who have felt exactly what you're feeling, stretching back to the very beginning of recorded history. You are not imagining it. You are remembering it. That's it for today's episode of Ghostlore. If this resonated with you, share it because that's how folklore works. Story to story, person to person, across whatever distance separates us. Next episode, we go specific. We'll take one ghost archetype, the wronged woman, the weeping spirit, the figure in white, and trace her across cultures and centuries to see what she tells us about the communities that summoned her. Until then, stay curious, stay a little unsettled, and pay attention to how a room feels when you walk into it.